will need to follow my voice as it leads you into a relaxed state of meditation.
Welcome back to the Hobby Grow podcast. I'm your host, Ben Owens, hobby grower and ghostwriter for the cannabis industry. Each week, we'll dive into my network of growers, hash makers, breeders, and mentors around the world to give you insight into their journeys, as well as give you information you can use to grow better weed and make better hash at home. Hit subscribe, roll something up, and let's get into it. This episode, we are joined by Zac Ricciardi, National Cannabis Specialist for Biosafe Systems, and my co-author on all things clean growing and clean growers. Zac and I met through his IPM work, and he has spent years helping growers prevent problems before they start. We dive into what that looks like for hobby growers trying to keep a clean and healthy garden without overcomplicating it. I asked Zac to join me today to talk about how hobby growers can build a simple, practical IPM routine, what to do before and after visiting other grows, why clean habits matter more than most growers think, how to avoid bringing pests and disease back home, why genetics can be one of your best IPM tools, how environment and plant selection affect pest pressure, as well as his advice to other growers. What's going on, man?
Yo, brother.
How you doing?
What's good? I'm okay for a Friday. How are you?
Yeah, I am also okay for a Friday.
Yesterday was fucking awesome at the tissue culture place.
Yeah,
Jesse,
so tell me about that.
Dude, he's working on stuff that like it's 20 years in the future, so to speak. Like he has a 3D modeling software where you can scan a plant and then we can take it down to just node spacing. Like he's got it mapped out to where you can like basically say, I want node spacing to be 3/4 of an inch, and it'll say, okay, these genotypes are typically within that, phenotypical expression. So when you're looking for traits, they can dial it down to node spacing, dude. It's nuts.
That is insane. And also, I mean, a level of detail just for characterizing a library that I don't think many people go to. I mean, I can speak personally and say that I don't even include that in my notes.
I'll when we have more stuff that's going to be kind of revealed to the public, I'll keep you abreast of all of it. But some of the stuff right now is still kind of hush hush, but changing the world, man.
Hell yeah. Well, that's always cool. So what is it that you were working on that introduced you to Jesse? Was it just like the sterility of the substrate, or?
My buddy Jarrett, who used to work for Next Big Crop, he and I had worked together for a really long time, and he linked me up with Jesse just to talk about like xylitol oxyphos applications. And Jesse, being the mad scientist that he is, he's like, well, let's try this, let's experiment with this shit. And it turned into, them basically running their acclimation mix with SSB and Biofighter for all their tissue culture starts that they send out across the country.
Okay, and so for those that are not familiar with Biofighter or SSB, that would be microbial inoculants for your media?
Correct. The way that Jesse does it though is kind of unique. He pre-wets his containers. Like if he's coming out of the vessel, out of the agar, he'll pre-wet the cocoa with the microbes as well as give them a bath. So he takes the entire, meristem culture out of the stock and then soaks it in a like distilled water solution to try to rinse off anything that could be on there. And then he sticks it in Biofighter and SSB, swishes it around a little bit, and then plants it up.
Okay. Yeah, I was blown away by some of the stuff that's happening in TC that I was blindly under the impression that I had to be knowledgeable about TC to implement TC in my process. And from what I've learned, it's not at all that way. You just have to have someone who is knowledgeable in your chain of supply, someone like you're describing who, can give you vials and say, here, just pop this open and plant it, and you're good to go.
There's a little bit of a learning curve with TC, man, but it's not, how do I put this and not insult anybody? I don't want to say that growers are afraid of science, because we do very scientific things on a daily basis. We're playing with chemistry and all that stuff. But I feel like the more cannabis gets into real science, the more people kind of just, I don't want to say it's an ego thing maybe, but they shy away from certain things because of lack of understanding instead of embracing it and wanting to learn it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that even about growing. Like when I first moved to Colorado, I was like, "Oh, I can't grow weed. I'm just gonna fuck that up. Like, there's no way. I need a automated lights and automated water. I need to make sure everything's automated, or I'm gonna screw it up." And then never went that route at all. But that premise of I can see that with tissue culture being like, it just sounds so complex. I'm gonna screw it up. It's not for me, and the more I talk about it with people, the less complex it actually seems, at least for the standpoint of the grower implementing it. Like if you are taking TC and doing TC, there's definitely a technique to that.
That's where the lab comes into play. That front end meristem dissection and actually cleaning up the genetics. But once that part is done, reacclimation and stuff, it's riding a bike,
It's
man.
as
The more
easy
you
as a
do it,
clone is really what it sounds like.
there's a little bit steeper learning curve, only because if you're going from Gen 0, sometimes your morphology is going to be kind of off. But what's kind of cool is when you go from the Gen 0, any progeny that you take typically exhibits normal growth patterns. So with some of the hormones that are used in TC, you can kind of mess stuff up and get weird elongated growth and just shit that doesn't
Lettuce
look
looking
normal.
plants.
But if you take clones off of that, those clones typically do not exhibit that same weird structural morphology.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm very newly familiar with it, but it does seem like, like in a situation where you have to pause things in the grow and you want to keep a stable alive, like if you could keep 10 or 12 vials versus 10 or 12 solo cups that are being consistently cloned in trays, and yeah, you can condense it to a 2x4 and keep your library alive, but I've done it. But a tray of vials seems way easier.
And there's a lot less variables when you go into a vial. You're not battling stagnation. You don't have to worry about up potting. Like when you're keeping genetics alive, there's a lot of stuff that's against you in terms of just time. Like plants get to a point where they want to flower regardless. And even if you suppress that, you're going to start to see other undesirable things start to pop up, because I've said this a million times, dude, plants don't know they're growing inside.
Right.
And so if you give them an unnatural environment, eventually like cancer develops, so to speak, where you're causing things to happen that wouldn't normally.
Yeah, I mean the plant is like, I know I'm too old to be in this condition, whatever this condition is, whether it's in a solo cup or whether it's in veg for too long or
There is a little bit of genetic variability there. The more sativa leaning, it seems like the longer they can kind of stay in that stasis period because of the fact that there is more sun at the equator. But even those, dude, like the folks that do the 24 hours of light and veg, there's no place on earth other than Alaska where it's 24 hours of light,
right.
year or, day in, day out, so to speak. And that's only for a couple of weeks. So nowhere on earth does that really occur.
Yeah, I mean, like I've always operated under the idea of like plants need rest. Like just like like it does. It can be an hour, it can be 2 hours. Like I'm not saying it has to be prolonged, but I've always done 18/6, maybe occasionally 24, but that's like for a specific need of a re-veg or something. Otherwise, like it's just give them 6 hours of rest. They seem to be happier. You can break it up too. You can do 2 hours of intermittent darkness.
Do you ever see that cycle where it was like 14 on, 10 off?
Yeah.
And then they're like, but they broke it up into like 7 hour intervals or something where it was like 7 on and then 5 off and then 7 on and then 5 off.
Yeah, and I know people who will just throw a light on in the middle of the night just to trigger, like just to keep that darkness period under a certain amount of time. Like, it doesn't have to be too long, just long enough to trigger the plants to be like, hey, wake up.
Anything over 50 U moles, the plants will see.
Okay. That's good
That's
to know.
they did a study on like the moon, and that's the brightest the full moon ever gets is 50 micromoles.
Okay.
So
Interesting. Like on a full moon day.
anything over that, the plants will see as light.
Okay. That's fine. So even a bright green light at, over 50 would still cause you that issue.
I had a instance here in Denver where they were having herms because of the IR cameras, dude.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's funny it's not funny. It's something you don't often think about. So maybe we should back up a little bit for those that haven't been reading Clean Growers and following along with some of the things you and I are working on, and back people up to where this journey in cannabis started for you, whether that's consumption or cultivation or where have you, and then working forward to now and your position in the industry and what you do and what your focuses are, and we can kind of go through some of those pivotal moments.
So my relationship with cannabis started as a teenager. I was a user of cannabis and found that it definitely gave me a better quality of life all around. There's a lot of folks out there that kind of need some type of substance to help them cope with reality. And cannabis was a way for me to kind of take a step back and look at things through a different lens and be a better person, for lack of a better description. It definitely keeps me more level-headed and just happy, healthy, and continuing on. But when I was a teenager, I left Colorado, moved to California, and got involved in the medical industry out there. That was not my intent when I moved to California. I kind of stumbled upon it, but did everything from hustling in the park to trimming up in Boonesville. And my California adventure was definitely very educational. I moved from the Bay Area down to North County, San Diego, and lived there for about a year and a half. Wasn't really involved in the industry at that point, but definitely, saw potential and wanted to learn more about what was going on kind of behind the scenes. And so got, more involved in SB 420, Prop 215, the medical programs that were in California at the time. And when my wife now, she was my girlfriend at the time, Allie, finished with college, we decided that we wanted to relocate up into Santa Cruz. And that's when, things really kind of started to snowball for me in terms of, being in the industry. I was working at a spot called the Hose Shop that was across the street from Santa Cruz Hydroponics and Organics. And we would do specialty stuff for those guys. Sometimes they would get rolls of PTFE tubing. Sometimes we would need to make things for them for their customers that were custom. And getting to know, Eric and Vondo pretty well. At one point, they offered me a job, and I was super excited for that possibility. But unfortunately, my garden was too big at the time. One of the requirements was that you couldn't have a lot of canopy space if you were going to be an employee because of the implication to the business. And so I was upfront with Eric and let him know that it probably wasn't going to work out. And I think he really appreciated the fact that I was honest, because after the housing market crisis and the economy crashed, I ended up moving out of California and coming back to Colorado. And at that time, the Colorado market was just really starting to get going. And of all places where Gardening Unlimited could have opened a store, they put one in Golden. And so I told, Shed at that point in time, Eric, I was like, I'm not implicated like I was. So, can I have a job? And I ran Rocky Mountain Hydroponics in Golden from the day that it opened to the day that it moved to Boulder. At that point, I parted ways with those guys. Painted motorcycles for a little while at Gunslinger Custom. They do a lot of Harley stuff. After that, was hired by American Clay Works and Supply. That really was an amazing in for me, because I got to talk to people that were growing, gardenias, potatoes, and cannabis all in the same day. They all had the same problems. And so I was able to really build a knowledge base on, what chemistries were efficient, what ones were compatible, and, what ones were kind of a waste of time. From ACW, working with a lot of the large grows, I did a lot of consulting during that period in time. At one point, I actually went and worked with an operation called Sweet Leaf, and did all of their integrated pest management at their 8 Denver facilities. And that was an ego issue. Shout out to most of the Sweet Leaf team, with the exception of Tyson. You're an asshole, and you're the reason that I left. That was an interesting experience, though, because I really got to see kind of the behind the scenes management side of the industry, and kind of how everything works from seed to sale, so to speak. After resigning from Sweet Leaf, I went back to work with American Clay for a little while and started doing outside sales for them rather than being a counter guy. Was doing a lot of Instagram stuff. All the gardens I was going to, I was taking a lot of pictures, and that's how I actually ended up at BioSafe. Jeff Klein, who's now the vice president, at the time he was the national sales manager, he was seeing my posts, and he hit me up and said, "Hey man, I'm going to be in Denver from this day to this day. If you want to go see anybody, let me know." And immediately I knew, I was like, BioSafe wants to give me a job. So I lined up the best grows that I could at the time, called in the favors and said, "Listen guys, we need to make this guy impressed, because I want him to know my capabilities and my knowledge base." And by our second visit, we weren't even talking about business. We were quoting the Big Lebowski and laughing. So I knew that it was going to be a good fit. When I went to interview at BioSafe, I walked up and they had the "Don't Tread on Me" flag out front. And I just thought, I'm home. And that was 9 years ago. So it's been quite an interesting journey, but I'm very fortunate to have, been given the opportunities that I was, and I'm blessed to work at BioSafe because we try to make the world a better place. There's not a bunch of gnarly chemicals that need to be sprayed to, address issues that we face. Mother Nature does this best, and sometimes old ways are the best ways. Our flagship is peroxide and vinegar.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I've been using Xeritol basically since we met, and slowly added on the slew of other products. But I wanted to circle back and double down sort of on sort of the California phase, then the sweet leaf phase, and then the now, as far as sort of an evolution of IPM. Like, I know we've talked about old school tricks with like popsicle sticks and things, just very basic, rudimentary IPM. But like, how has IPM changed from when you were like in California? What was IPM like versus like Sweet Leaf had its own kind of unique role in the industry, and then to where we are now?
So California, back in the early 2000s was the Wild West. There was no regulatory oversight in terms of product once it was harvested. There was no testing for microbials. There was no testing for banned substances. There was no testing for PGRs. And so it was kind of all over the board. There were some growers that still tried to do things as ethically as possible. There were growers that, instead of fighting issues, just chop down and start over. And then there was a group of growers that used illicit substances to battle their issues. And to kind of just jump forward a little bit, in 2026, if you're still doing that, better. Back then, we didn't necessarily have the same analytics. And so I don't want to say that we were completely innocent, but it wasn't like we were being malicious with our intent at that point. The industry was not at a point where there was really a whole lot of state oversight. It was basically either acceptable or it wasn't. And so, everybody kind of had their own secret sauce, so to speak.
They
had
you borrowed from
nutrients.
what you knew from ag, right? Like whatever resources was available. Hey, this is used everywhere.
This is before Google. So,
Right.
I don't want to say before Google,
Right,
but I
but
mean,
before
you had the ability to type in, how do I kill spider mites? And then you have just a million pages of data on ways to get it done. This was looking at old research papers. This was looking at, Cornell studies, and it just, like you said, trying to emanate as much knowledge as you could from actual agriculture to try to make it so that you were mimicking the pros, so to speak. And that's one message I want to like hammer home to home growers is you don't necessarily have to use the exact same products, but the processes that they do those for a reason. And if you can institute similar processes in your garden at home, why you're doing stuff, and you can make adjustments and, effectively change a scenario because you're going off of a standard operating procedure. If you just kind of wing it and you're doing whatever on whatever day, then it's really hard to know what caused what. And so, that causality and just that regimented, today's this, so we're doing this, is something that home growers can definitely take from commercial folks and incorporate it into their setups at home and increase their quality, productivity, etc.
yeah, I mean, just scheduling in general, like talking to you, that's helped me like figure out how to use all the pieces. Like I get one piece, I'm pretty confident I can just, put my blinders on and myopically focus on, I will make sure this gets applied. But you start doing 3, 4, 5 different things in rotation. You're like, I don't know, is is it Monday? Is it Wednesday? Like, when am I supposed to be adding this? Can these be mixed? Like knowing all that, having a sheet or a resource or something, a plan
Even
is
even
huge.
like getting outside of cannabis, you go to some of the largest cut flower producers in the United States, like your, Tagawas, Metrolina greenhouses, Liner Source. They literally have propagation schedules that are filled out to 2028. They know what they're doing years ahead of time. And that gives you the advantage of never being caught unaware. Stuff is going to pop up, but if you have a procedure that you follow, you're able to make replicatable results.
Yeah, I mean, like I mean, the most I've ever planned out is like 18 months in advance, which seems so extreme, but that was for the wedding in order to grow all the flowers and time all the smokables and fresh flowers and all the different deliverables, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, even at that point, it was so nice because it was like, okay, I know exactly when I'm chopping. I know when reset is. I know when I'm supposed to have clones ready. I know when I'm supposed to have treated them, whatever, with oxyphos, like whatever those steps are. There's no guesswork.
I've said this many, many times, but no plan is a bad plan.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, um, so Sweet Leaf, back when, there was this.
So Sweet Leaf was really an interesting experience because it was on the cusp of regulatory really being rolled out in retail cannabis. Even in the early days in Colorado, there were folks that were spraying things that weren't necessarily labeled for ingestible crops because they didn't have any penalties for doing so. And, I can understand from a commercial standpoint, doing one application versus six, that one application is going to save you a considerable amount of time. But as the snowball's gone down the hill, we know that there are a litany of ill effects that can come from some of these chemistries. And so that's why, the more labor intensive route is the only route at this point, because we don't want to make people sick. When I started at Sweet Leaf, that's when the quote unquote approved list was kind of debuting on the scene, and the state looked at different insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, plant growth regulators, and decided which ones had a broad enough label to be utilized in cannabis. There was no safety or efficacy data done. It was basically, is this label vague enough so that we can put it on this crop type? I actually personally ran into an instance where our first label was rejected because we said ornamentals and containerized crops. And the regulatory body said that's too specific because we said ornamentals first. We had to say containerized crops and ornamentals. So there was a lot of semantics that went into it in the early days. But getting into Sweet Leaf, I basically kind of had to develop a rotation of safer chemistries that was complementary. That's really where I was able to take theory and put it into practice. At American Clayworks, I had been able to design a lot of integrated pest management programs and got feedback from them. But actually applying the stuff myself, I was able to see where things shined, where things didn't necessarily, line up, and, how we could make things better. And we had a really good deal of success at Sweet Leaf given the environment that we were in. You can never completely eliminate an issue if you're hand watering when we're talking about spider mites or thrips, because you are a vector for disease at that point. And if your hand watering people are going into, every room of your facility, then you're just going to spread the problem around. In home grows, if you're going to hand water and you have an issue, make sure that's the last part of your grow that you go into. We always want to think of veg almost like the Alamo. We want to keep that as clean as possible. That's the first place we go when we go into the garden. And if we are done in veg, I know there are some scenarios where veg and flower are in the same room type of thing, but work on those plants first. Always start with veg, because once we're done there, we don't want to go back. That way we're not having a misstep or causing redundant problems by being a vector for pests or disease.
Okay, yeah, no, so that's, I mean, I definitely always start with like the cleanest and work backwards from there. But I often trend the opposite. So that's interesting because, in my head, like I don't want to bring anything from veg like into the flower areas.
And I can understand the mentality of wanting to just kind of segregate the spaces, but in my experience, brother, like doing veg first allows us to keep veg cleaner.
Okay.
If there are any issues that proliferate during a flower cycle, as much as that kind of sucks, it's only 8 weeks that we're dealing with said issue. If veg is dirty, it's perpetual.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. So compare that to now, we have, this is what, 9, 10 years later, we have a significantly better understanding of just chemistries as a whole for cannabis, but also what certain things do that, maybe weren't as great for us, like Eagle 20 and things that were just common cannabis brands people knew as tools, that now we would never touch with a 10-foot pole. But now I'm also seeing, this rise of remediation and radioactive treatments. Like, when did that pop on the scene, and how is that affecting how people are approaching IPM?
So, jump forward to now. The industry has had, like you said, about 10 years to basically kind of put some guardrails in place for folks in terms of what they're able to use in a commercial facility. A lot of, the recommended chemistries have similar active ingredients, so it's confusing for some growers because trade names really don't mean anything. You need to look at what the active ingredient is and make sure that you're not applying the same thing 3 times under 3 different trade names. But the biggest thing that's come out in the last couple of years is testing. That is really what has taken away illicit substances in the recreational cannabis market, because when you harvest a batch, it has to be tested for potency, contaminants, so that's yeast and mold, microbials, as well as illicit substances. And they're trying to do as much as they can on their end to ensure that the public is getting a safe product. um, but when we talk about something like a rad source machine, the mentality is that they are going to be able to pass testing regardless. And so I'm not a fan of rad sourcing. I understand why some people do it, but in my heart of hearts, I feel like that comes from a point of, how do I say this and not offend anybody? You almost get complacent with your issues because you know that in the end you're still going to be able to sell your product. It gives people an insurance policy, and by having that machine at their disposal, they're not going to be as diligent in terms of keeping a clean environment, because they know in the end, if you throw it in a microwave, there's not going to be any living microbial stuff on that tissue. And the unfortunate part is the testing isn't as specific as maybe it should be, because it's only going after active colonies. It doesn't factor in mycotoxin. And so if you've had a pathogen, for example, something like alternaria, that can make people very sick. And even if you rad source it, that alternaria mycotoxin is still in that biomass. And so how much of that is, is it rendered safe? I don't know. I don't think so.
Right. But when did that start? Like, was that in the last few years, or like how? I mean, I remember
rad sourcing probably came around in 2017, 2018.
Okay.
It was right around when people started failing tests for having grows that were not set up to be grows. There were a lot of people in the early days that moved into old warehouses and buildings and hung lights and put up fans just to kind of get their business going. And they never got past step one. Like, a lot of the infrastructure issues are directly correlated to people's problems with yeast and mold. If you're growing in a room that's got a bunch of sheetrock in it that you can see the black mold growing through, it doesn't matter how much Xeritol you spray on your plants, you're always going to have mold in that environment.
Yeah. No, I mean the facility, or I mean, it's like growing in a damp basement in a tent. Like, it's you're going to have a constant threat of mildew and mold and things like that.
That being said, knowing those variables, there's a lot of stuff you can do on the front end to mitigate it. Installing dehumidification ahead of time so that you don't wait till you get a spike. Stuff like powdery mildew, it's going to come about once we have those ebbs and flows in temp and humidity. If we think about growing squash or pumpkins outside, man, we can grow it all summer. You don't see a speck of powdery mildew. As soon as October hits, we hit hot days, cool nights, and that PM pops right back up. So, even in a hobby grow, I would say environmental controls are probably one of the most important investments. People like to brag about their nutrients and, I got this light or whatever. It's like, dude, you need a dehumidifier and an AC unit before you buy anything else that's, upper echelon type of stuff.
Well, and one of the most interesting things you pointed out to me recently is how much, and I keep thinking about it because I went through this in the grow, and is how container size affects those swings. Because, so I typically do 5 or 7 gallon pots, and, recently moved to the grow. The new space, for whatever reason, I could not keep the humidity down. I had to go buy another dehumidifier. I had to do all these things and was like really fighting this huge humidity swing. And then this most recent cycle, I decided I was going to do all 3 gallon pots instead, with the advice of a few other growers. Plants looked happier. Humidity levels stayed more consistent. I feel like the watering, that static moisture level was a narrower range. And I don't know. I mean, it's been interesting thinking back and reflecting on that, as like maybe that, like I had so much wet soil at one time, and that's what was adding to the additional environmental changes.
Doing transplants is definitely beneficial to plants in the long run, but in my heart of hearts, people do use too big of pots most of the time. If you're diligent and you're in your garden every day, you don't need a 5 gallon container. 5 gallon containers are for tomato plants on the porch, so to speak. There's a little bit of a buffer zone there, but when we're growing something like cannabis, we don't want that buffer zone. We want that plant to utilize what we're giving it within 24 hours so we can give it more. And, to your point about that humidity, you're depending on desiccation of the environment as well as the plant being able to uptake stuff to offset that humidity. And when you put a 3 gallon container into a 5 gallon container, you effectively double that root zone size. So it's going to take some time for those roots to search out that media. And something Jesse and I were talking about yesterday is like, how wet should your media actually be? And I like to use it on like a scale of like 1 to 5. 5 being if you squeeze it in your hand and moisture is running, like you got water running out of it, that's too wet. 1 is being it's just dust. You can't clump it up at all. It blows away. Typically, we want to be between a 3 and a 4 to where you can take it out of the container, you can squeeze it, it'll clump up, but it doesn't necessarily like drain out of your hand at that point. Having that moisture level consistent allows those roots to really do their job. If we overwater in a small container, we placate root growth and they don't expand. If we water into a big container with a small root zone, same premise. Those roots are placated. They're not going to go searching for that, expended space at that point. And, a lot of times people will transplant right before they go into flower. You have about 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the strain, of root zone expansion once that, photo period clicks over. It's going to expand the roots a little bit, but once we transition from setting into bulking and ripening, your root zone is done growing. And so how much root growth, like how long did it take you to fill out that 3 gallon?
Right.
Then you put it into a 5 gallon and we're giving it 3 to 5 weeks. You can assume that there will be decent root growth, but at the same time, could you mimic those same results in that 3 gallon pot and just up your irrigation cycle a little bit?
Right. Just like, sow the clone right into the 3 gallon if you have the space, and then let it rip for 4 weeks and then throw it into flower because you're going to have a full root bill.
If it was me, I would start it in like a 4.5 inch pot and then throw it into a 3 gallon. Those baby steps really allow you to dial in that moisture.
Even with the extra transplant shock, or the extra shock of transplant, I should say.
I mean,
like direct sowing into the final pot, I've always thought was like sort of an ideal, but always space limiting, right? Like if
you're at that point, you're waiting on that 3 gallon to dry down.
Okay, so it's a moisture management thing.
Exactly. This is just allows you to irrigate more frequently. And, that old saying, more roots, more fruits. If you can develop a faster root system, then you're going to transplant sooner and you can just expedite your process. Having a larger container, it's not necessarily not a bad thing if labor is a limiting factor. But if you really want to maximize the potential of your plants, you want at least 2 transplants in there. Something during veg that's a smaller container. I typically like they're called SVDs. They're like a 4.5 inch square pot, 4.5 by 4.5. do that for 2-3 weeks, and then go into your 3 gallon when it's a nice big root ball, and that's
Okay.
going to establish a lot better.
Yeah, because I typically do like a clone tray to two, like 1.5 inch, rock wool cube to like a 2 inch pot. Then let that get little root. Then get that into a 4.5 or 1 gallon, and then from there 1 gallon into final pot, whether that's 3 gallon, 5 gallon, 7 gallon, whatever.
Even if you wanted to go from like clone into a 1 gallon, I've seen that be pretty successful.
Just as
I
far
wouldn't
as
make the
maintaining
jump
that momentum.
I just wouldn't jump all the way up to a 3 from an AOK.
Okay, that's fair. So on that note, we've kind of hit on the momentum of the plant and stagnation as a factor in its health and just overall performance. But what other things, like genetics, I think are something that we've also touched on a little bit. But, I have my buddy out in Hawaii that we wrote that piece on for Clean Growers about really your best defense on an island in a tropical climate is not trying to retrofit genetics from other climates into your situation and working with what's proven. Like, what is that something, like, I don't know, tell me a little bit more about, like, I guess genetic selection as an IPM tool.
So there are certain environments that plants will do better in, and there are certain environments that plants are going to struggle in. And it's gotten a lot harder now because the gene pool has become so muddled in cannabis. But if you can try to mimic, the homeland, so to speak, of where your genetics come from, you're going to have better results. A lot of commercial growers run into an issue where they have this Noah's Ark of genetics. They're trying to grow something that's native to Ecuador next to something that's native to Afghanistan. And they can kind of find this happy medium where both plants do okay, but neither genetic's going to fully express itself because it's almost like using a triple 20 fertilizer. It's basic. We're not seeing anything special, but we're getting it done. If you have the ability to grow certain varieties and say, you like something that's a 11 weeker, it's going to like more heat and humidity because it's native to the more equatorial regions of the world where there's a longer photo period. So those, environmental conditions, it's going to be more suited to battle things like mold and mildew due to its terpene content, because in the jungle, it's wet all the time. And so if you've got an environment where it's like, I can't get the temp down to a certain level, my humidity is always high, look into some of those more equatorial varieties, because you're able to basically use its own genetic makeup to make up for some of the environmental shortcomings that may occur in some facilities or home grows. On the flip side of that, if you want something that's a fast finisher and your environment is dialed in, look for something that's more native to, a mountainous region, because we know that they're short, much shorter flowering plants. They do well in colder temperatures. They're stockier. They don't need the same requirements. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, again, these plants don't know they're growing inside. If you can get on, one of the genealogy websites and do your research and figure out the lineage of your strain, figure out what the parents were, you can figure out what type of environment it would like. Like, we don't want to put Eskimos in Miami and, that type of thing. If we can match the environment to where it came from, you're going to see less environmental issues because of the fact that it is going to be more acclimated to that climate already.
Okay, so I mean, like, in, I guess, like a practical way of looking, you could look at like the latitude, like, if things that are on the same latitude as where you are. So like whether you're on the other side of the world or this side of the world, it's going to be like the same latitude that Colorado's at, or I guess, and then stacking on top of that, like if you're in a mountainous region of Colorado at 8,000, 9,000 feet, then just because you found something at the right latitude on the other side of the world doesn't, that's at sea level, that still may not perform in that same.
In my heart of hearts, brother, like, altitude seems to be more important than like exact location.
Okay.
Like, stuff that grows in high altitude, because the conditions are going to be similar in most mountainous regions. It's a shorter growing season. There's high winds. That's why they're stockier plants.
Yeah.
Again, what are the issues in the environment? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then just doing a little bit of homework. With AI out there now, I think you could probably figure it out relatively easily in terms of where did this come from.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's crazy to see already how that's being implemented into some of these things. So beyond just, genetic selection and selecting plants that are made for your environment, as a hobby grower, I find personally, and you and I have talked about this, that it can be hard to try to mimic what commercial growers are doing to keep pathogens at bay and to be on top of their preventative maintenance. Not only just from access, some things you just can't buy in small enough quantities or in reasonable sizes for home growers, but also, I mean, truly in cost, right? So as far as prioritizing things for a home grower, dropping $1,100 on IPM chemistries versus a new light, that light looks pretty shiny and fancy. So, like, how would you advise home growers prioritize their chemistries, their applications? Like, is there, like a balance you find is helpful for your own budgeting with toys, like 50% or less has to go to IPM? What are those boundaries to kind of help somebody who wants to be better about IPM, but maybe is daunted by some of the costs of some of these?
So the commercial aspect in terms of sizes of containers really is the biggest turnoff for home growers. You probably don't need a 2.5 gallon of xylitol if you're growing in a 4x4 tent in your basement. But this kind of all goes back to what I said earlier, where we don't look at trade names, we look at active ingredients. If we are on a smaller scale and we still want to use a similar method of action, you can buy hydrogen peroxide for $4.99 at the store and then mix it at a 1-to-3 ratio and make a plant safe product that you could utilize in a similar fashion to the professional products. It's having that same mentality and understanding that they're using a peroxide for a reason. They're using a citric acid for a reason. They're using a soap for a reason.
Pyrethrin or azadirachtin, or just looking at those active ingredients on the label.
Everything that's available in a commercial size is going to be available in a retail size. You may have a little bit less strength in said product, but there is no commercial chemistry that cannabis growers can use that isn't going to be available to both commercial and home growers. The bottle might be different, the manufacturer might be different, concentration might be different, but it's going to be the same actives.
So then when you're looking at those products and say you find something that you're like, okay, cool, this has, pyrethrin, or this has azadirachtin or whatever, are there non-actives or inactive ingredients that you're also looking for as like this has the one active I'm looking for, but it also has this black sludge that I'm trying to avoid?
So unfortunately, the way that labeling laws are set forth, you don't have to disclose inactives. And so it's anybody's guess what's in the other 98%, 95%, 90% of that bottle. A lot of times it's water. Sometimes it's some surfactants. Sometimes it's other chemicals. Again, because it's labeled inert, they don't have to tell us what it is. For home growers, more often than not, if you can find that OMRI label on the product, you can be confident that the inerts in there aren't going to be harmful to an end user.
Okay.
That's not the case every single time, but more often than not, organic certification is going to be safer than non-organic certified products.
Okay. And then as far as like you touched on ornamentals versus containerized plants, like is that some language to be looking for on these products as well?
I mean, it's just broad scale verbiage to be accepted by the state. It had nothing to do with safety or efficacy. It was literally just, is this ambiguous enough for us to use?
Because like I see ornamental and I typically would avoid something that was like for ornamental use only.
I'll put it like this. If you can't pronounce the active ingredient easily, it's probably not safe for edible crops.
Okay.
No. If you see numbers and dashes in the formula, don't put it on your food.
Okay. Yeah, and then don't put it on something you're going to combust and inhale.
Exactly. To touch back on like what you had said earlier, back in the early days when people were using Eagle 20, myclobutanol is only dangerous when it's combusted. You can put Eagle 20 on your tomatoes, eat it, it passes through your digestive tract unchanged, and you're fine. It's when you light it on fire that it becomes a problem. And so with some of these chemistries, it's like we need to have combustion studies on stuff that has residual so that we know what it is that's actually occurring. And I might get, some frowny faces for saying this, but if you look at a lot of the approved lists that are put out by the states, 60% of the list is horticultural oils.
Yeah.
Have you ever dude, when oil burns, it's black acrid smoke. Like if you've ever seen an oil derrick burn on the ocean, it's not a pretty sight. And they're telling people to use these oils on crops that are going to be lit on fire. Now, while oils have a place in IPM, they should not be used later on, but there are growers that don't have the right education or guidance, maybe from the state. And so if the state says it's okay, they're going to battle their problem until they're told not to. But again, like oil is not something I would ever want to put on top of my bowl. Maybe some hash oil, but definitely not petroleum oil.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's it goes to this ongoing. I think discussion's probably a euphemism for it at this point, but a contention between the testing and the operators and the home growers who, on the one hand, they're saying, hey, well, we're testing for these. But like any test, if you understand what the test is for, you understand how to pass the test and what sacrifices are being made to pass the test and at what expense, right? Like if I can use this approved product that will make sure I pass the test, but maybe it is carcinogenic when combusted if there's residuals, like that, what is that trade-off? And then on the flip side of this is I hear a lot of commercial operators saying that many home growers, their products would not pass the level of rigorous testing that commercial operators are being put through. And so it can be unfair to compare quality side by side. Like is there truth to that? Do you find that that's the case?
So in my book, man, there are two types of home growers. There are the artisanal home growers that want the best smoke that they can produce for themselves. And then there are the trappers.
Right.
The artisanal home growers could pass testing because they care. They're doing preventative maintenance. Their environments are clean. They're cycling stuff properly. They're taking diligent notes. They're able to log everything and ensure that they're doing things correctly. They don't need a rad source machine because they've never had an outbreak because they're in preventative mode. On the flip side of that, there are growers that definitely could not pass testing, still use Eagle 20 and don't care about the end user. Those guys are in it just for the cash. And in my heart of hearts, they should just sell cocaine now because weed is so inexpensive that they're not doing anything gangster at this point. Like if you're going to make people sick willingly, again, it's 2026. If you're still using Eagle 20, you're an asshole.
Yeah. Well, and like, so that's kind of the spectrum, right? The 0 to 10. Like if you're at 0, you're still using 25, 30-year-old methods and ignoring the consumer's health. And on the flip side, you're doing everything as humanly possible to produce a product that you are comfortable consuming.
I would say like for home growers, you've got 0s, you've got 10s. The majority of commercial cultivators are going to fall between like a 6 and a 7. They do the best that they can, but you get into
the reality of the industry.
Dude, there's more shit than shovel. If you've got 8 guys and you need to prune 60,000 square feet, that's going to take a couple days. And, whatever else you had scheduled, what's more important at that point? Are we going to flip this room the way it's supposed to, or are we going to leave a row unpruned and then deal with botrytis in 3 weeks?
Right. Well, and, like times it becomes a job, right? Like it's, again, like when you have a passion, you're in the grow and you're like, oh shit, it's 1 a.m. Whereas like when you're at any job, you're like, oh man, 5 o'clock, time to leave.
Exactly.
Like it's the hazard of the actual occupation being an occupation.
I guess the best way to summarize that, Ben, is the best weed still comes in Ziploc bags.
Yeah, it's or glass jars. These days we're being a little classy
You know what I'm
with
saying.
our ball jars. But yeah, no, I agree with that, and it's like this. I liken it to whiskey, right? Like from a packaging perspective, like if you're a whiskey guy or a tequila guy, or you've drank nice anything, coffee or otherwise, sort of the bottom of the barrel has the worst packaging, and then the top of the barrel, like the absolute most select offerings, are probably not even labeled, if anything with a Sharpie or maybe like a piece of tape that says like 2023 or something on it. Like there's no labeling, and that's like family reserve pulled out of the vault for you. And then everything in between, you're like, well, if it's a high-end product, it deserves high-end packaging, and it does it up until a certain point, right? And then it's just like the weed or the hash or whatever it is so much better that it doesn't matter what the packaging is. You're like, what did I just hit in that joint? Where did that go?
In my experience, brother, the packaging provides the perception of value, and the fancier the jar, the more mids the product. And I'm not saying that in every case, but it seems like the more you have to do to try to sell your weed, the worse the weed typically is. Good weed sells itself. You don't need to put cartoon characters on your bags. You don't need to liken it to desserts. There's just a lot of marketing that's gone into trying to sell subpar product instead of just trying to grow better product.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And I think when you start growing, it's something you realize, right? Like you start, not to say that you pop seeds and everything looks easy, but all of a sudden you're like, this is way more attainable than I thought. It may not be easy. It may take me time to get to the level of quality I'm used to buying, but I don't necessarily need to spend money on your flashy side wrap labels or your embossed gold foil stickers or whatever it might be.
The plants don't care what type of nutrients you're using,
I
man.
love fancy labels, for the record.
Whether it's a bag that says Jax or it's a bottle with a picture of a girl with big boobs, the plants see NH4, P2O5, and K2O. The additives are where you can actually get into some special stuff. But when we're talking base nutrition, man, it's cigarettes. What brand appeals to you? Because it's all the same shit.
Right. And going back to what you said about inerts, my biggest complaint about nutrients, and even the ones that I enjoy, is that there isn't a full recipe of what's in there on the back. And I understand it's proprietary. Like, duh, that's why they have their own product as opposed to what else is out there. But aminos and some of these other things, there isn't like a comprehensive list like there is, on food even at this point. So,
Again, as the industry evolves and more regulation comes into place, I think that, that may be considered in the long run in terms of exactly like in the state of Colorado, they put in an addendum that said any non-organic ingredients used in cultivation must be disclosed on the label. So if you're using salts, you have to put that you're using calcium nitrate and, potassium chloride on your label. Does that mean that it's bad? No. But having that organic blanket of like, this is organic, so I don't need to tell you about it, it's good and bad. That I like organic stuff, but arsenic is organic. So that doesn't necessarily
right.
mean, or don't correlate organic with safe every single time you hear the word. Is it
Well,
better?
yeah.
Yes. Is it completely safe? Depends on what we're talking about.
Right. And depends on the grower and depends on everything. I mean, it's, you know, there's a flaw in language, which is that we like things to be easily explainable and generalizable. And, it's way easier to just say organic than it is to say, well, I use all natural inputs, or I use, I'm sourcing compost from my local this. And then, you're an hour later into your, how did you build your soil? And you're like, do you use bottles or not? That was really what I was asking, and like, so yeah, I mean, on that note, I personally have gone back to using bottles. I like it. I think that I trust my manufacturers and the people I use. Shout out New Millennium. But yeah, I mean, I understand the appeal, and I also feel like it depends on your access. We're blessed to live in a place like Colorado where we have access to a lot of different options if we want to grow weed with different supplies and nutrients and chemistries and whatever.
I would say unless you're living in South Dakota or Idaho, you have access, man.
Oh, okay.
Like everybody can get on the internet and order shit up from Arbico or GrowGen or even Amazon at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I only say that because I've recommended things to growers who are like, "Oh, I can't get that where I am," and it had never occurred to me.
Try harder, dude. You can find it.
Well, and also international. I mean, for that matter, like we were in Europe, when we were talking about certain things, like it was harder to get. Definitely there were different products available, and like Mills, I think, was a company that was like really non-existent over here, but they have a huge presence in Europe.
The EU's regulations are completely different. Mexico is a completely different beast. Canada is a completely different beast. But
Islands, Australia, like
if you're in the contiguous United States, you can get access to what you need.
Okay.
If you can't find it, you're not looking hard enough. It exists.
So on that note, transitioning a little to like visiting grows, because it's something that you and I have talked about and done together. But like I feel very dirty leaving anyone else's grow, and I try not to, like, whether they have a dirty grow or not, like I time what I'm doing so that if I have to go into my grow, I'm going before I go into anyone else's grow. But do you have specific recommendations for people who are either visiting grows or plant sitting for other people or consulting, or maybe they just work at a facility and they want to have a clean hobby grow at their house?
So what I do, when I go visit growers is I bring a plastic bag with me if I'm going to go to multiple spots, and I will bring a change of clothes and a change of shoes. That is just so that I don't become a vector. If you walk in even to an office in a dirty grow, there's a potential for you to be a vector to carry stuff. Um, when I get home, I take my clothes and I take that bag and it goes straight into the washing machine. I don't let them linger because laziness is going to cause issues. In the summertime, I will leave my shoes outside. In the wintertime, I put them in the garage. But the mentality there is the temp swing, like pretty darn cold. I don't think, thrips and mites are going to live when it's 10 degrees outside. So, just trying to treat my shoes in that way. I'll also walk on a biomat when I get home, try to disinfect them.
What about
If,
your phone and like your watch or like things like that you're using and taking pictures of, or if you're researching or you're looking things up, like do you have a decontamination or just don't touch those things while you're in somebody else's grow?
everybody likes to take pictures. So there are a couple options there. Throw your phone in a Ziploc bag, put a prophylactic around it so that you know that it's going to be sanitized. Um, Hit it with some isopropyl alcohol. There are a couple different ways to sanitize tools,
Like a
so to speak.
UVC light?
UVC is more for pathogens rather than pests. But UVC ozone does show great efficacy against fungal spores and bacteria. So if that's the concern, that's definitely a viable way to address that inoculum. But I always like to try to have an outfit for every occasion, so to speak. Like if I'm going into a facility, the clothes that I have on are going to be changed as soon as I leave that facility. It's hard sometimes on the road because I have to bring 10 shirts, 10 pairs of pants, the whole rigmarole, but it is important to do as much as you can to prevent issues before they become problems. And if you see issues, assume you're dirty. Even if you don't see issues, like if you is not even a garden, man. If you go to the grow store, change your clothes because everyone else that goes to the grow store is gardening as well. And even though there's not plants in that grow store, the likelihood that there is some type of contamination is pretty high. If you see somebody in there buying pyrethrum bombs or Corda-Azomax, maybe wait till he leaves before you make your purchase, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what to look for is sort of the warning sign. But yeah, I did. Grow stores are a huge vector, and I feel like grow events. Like as much as I love grow events, like anywhere you get a bunch of growers together in one spot, there's going to be a vector for things to spread.
Go to your garden before you go to the event.
Yeah, whether
Do
it's
your
a
work ahead of time.
trade show, seed show, sesh, whatever.
I hate to sound paranoid, but anywhere you go where there could be other cultivators, just exercise caution. Even if you've been in their grow, people aren't always forthcoming with information, and it sucks to find out that you have hop latent viroid when you have hop latent viroid. There are certain things that will bite you in the butt, and just my whole mentality of preventative over curative, it's a lot easier to change your clothes than it is to battle hop latent viroid in the long run. And I know that that's a little bit of a stretch, but I'm just making that comparison in terms of things can go really bad if you get complacent. Just like the rad source machine, there is no you know what
Yeah,
I'm
I
saying.
mean, I can speak to complacency. I mean, even as someone who like we have these conversations regularly, and I consider myself to be pretty informed about what I should be doing. It's easy to get complacent. Even if you're gone a week, you're like, oh, the plant sitter doesn't have to worry about the applications for the week. Like I'll be back in 3 applications, and I'll come back and hit rotation, and then all of a sudden you've got PM, or something because like you were, it's admittedly your fault. You're like it'll be fine for a couple weeks, whatever.
It's neglect.
Yeah. So, um, and I think that it happens the best, especially with a hobby when it isn't your primary job, and this isn't like what's paying the bills and the high priority life stuff that keeps the lights on and whatnot. Like, I understand how people can become complacent, and like I have a good friend who recently told me that he has it set up now so he doesn't even have to step foot in his grow for 3 full weeks if he didn't want to, and he still does, but it's that automated. And as nice as that is, I always look at automation as sort of that tiptoeing towards complacency. Like you talk about irrigation, versus like hand watering versus like actually irrigating it and as a method of controlling vector. But do you see that also as a vector for laziness and, that side of things?
The crux for hand watering is scale. When you get to a point where you're spending half of your day watering, you're just being a glorified hose, that's when irrigation really can come into play because it allows you to become a gardener again. If we're talking about a small, 8x8 room, 10x10, just a tent, the amount of labor that you're going to save is going to be negligible. And so for home growers, it doesn't make as much sense because you're going to be in that canopy either way doing maintenance. The trade-off for that comes to where it's like, dude, I don't have time to do any manicuring because I'm standing here with a watering can for 9 hours a day or what have you. And so I think it's that crux, man, of like, are you able to effectively take care of everything and not neglect anything? And when you get to the point where it's watering is occupying most of the time, that's when, you maybe look at that hobby dosatron setup or, a Mondi pump and some fucking woodpecker drippers or what have you. There are inexpensive ways for people to set up irrigation at home, but really when it only becomes a paramount need when other aspects of the garden start to fall off because you're spending too much time irrigating.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense because then you also have a new system to clean, periodically. So, and a new whole set of routines and processes, as you said, to kind of maintain. So,
well, and you figure like you have to pay yourself, even if it's a hobby. How much is your time worth? And at what point does it become not cost efficient to put something in? If you're saving 10 minutes of time, but it's costing you $600 to do it, are you paying yourself, $6,000 an hour?
Well, and I mean, the counter I would say to that is if you have a trouble sticking to an irrigation schedule, or if you have trouble keeping your substrate uniformly moist because you live in a super arid climate or something, then maybe you're not only solving the labor factor, but you're solving that static moisture factor too.
Again, man, there are instances where irrigation makes sense, but for a lot of home growers, being able to hand water and keep up with maintenance is totally possible.
Yeah, and it gives you a chance to scout. Like that's why I find like hand watering. I get to if I'm popping seeds, I get to look for herms. I'm looking for any signs of distress or what's going on with those leaves and under the canopy or whatever. Like while I'm sticking my head in there watering.
So let's say you're scouting and you find something. What do you do?
What do? I text you. No, but if I find something, I'll generally take the first leaf or the affected leaf or section of the plant. I'll remove it from the canopy, and then best case scenario, I have a bag or a container or something I'm putting it in. Worst case scenario, it's going on to like a surface or something in a different room. But yeah, like, cause then I'm going to scope it. Like my idea is to remove it from the area and scope it, like with the least vector of contamination possible. But admittedly, if it's in the center, like if it's in the center of my 4x4, I'm not putting it in a bag before I rip it through. I'm, just trying not to touch everything as it leaves, because I'm assuming that whole area has probably been somewhat exposed.
The plastic bag trick is something commercial growers and home growers should utilize. If you suspect you have an issue, like Ben said, try to be as careful as possible. But using that prophylactic really allows us to contain the spread. And if we're talking about insects, it'll contain those as well. They don't fall off the leaf. Or I mean, even if they do fall off the leaf, they're going to be in the bag, and you're still able to scope them and get a positive ID on what it is you're dealing with.
Yeah, because the alternative that I have also tried is just scoping it right there off, trying to look at the live plant and not touch the leaf and, wait for the fan not to hit it so it's not blowing around and,
Makes it a little more difficult.
It's a little bit more difficult to see. Okay, well, so I think we've covered IPM pretty heavily. Is there something like for people who have like been listening to this and are like, I would like to start a very modest, whatever that is, IPM for them, like where would you say start? Would it be sort of a sanitizer, sterilizer? Would it be microbials? Would it be something else?
There's a couple different products that I would recommend getting and just kind of throwing into rotation. The first one being some type of, oxidizer or peroxidal chemistry. Those are awesome for dealing with microbes. They're zero residual style chemistry, so they're safe to be used throughout the entire cycle. And, they allow us to deal with a litany of issues that can arise. I would recommend getting some type of neem oil or azadirachtin style product to use as a preventative to keep insect populations from finding their way into the garden. And then I would recommend looking into some citric acid style product as your initial three. The citric acid is awesome against insects, but it's also a food grade preservative and a mold inhibitor. So it kind of covers the entire gamut of anything that you would be spraying for. And there are homeowner versions of, neem oil, azadirachtin, uh, peroxide, and citric acid. So those are three that I think every grower should have on the shelf. It's a good way to tackle any issue that you might be facing initially. We may have to get a little bit more in depth depending on the scenario. But if I could only pick three things to have in the tool cabinet, it would be those three to start.
Okay. No, I think that that's a great place, and very accessible. Like you said, like you can find those three products pretty easily, even if you have to go search for a different variety or brand.
If you can't find it on Amazon or Depot, I don't know what to tell you.
All right. Well, so let's work our way into some rapid fires and talk a little bit about kind of your this or that's. Like when you think back to your first grow setup, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the first technical grow, but the first time you considered yourself actually growing worth the salt and not like I just popped this and threw it in the windowsill and a, kind of thing. What was that first setup like? And, your stack, like lights, nutrients, substrate, genetics, like what were you working with back then? And then, comparing to now.
So my first grow that was entirely my own was in my house in Santa Cruz off of Second and Main. It was a Victorian unit. They split up into three separate units, and the coolest part about that house was there was only 1 meter. And when we went to look at it, there was a garage next to the spot we were looking at. And so I asked the landlord lady, I'm like, who gets the garage? She's like, the other tenants say you can have it. It's yours. So I went and knocked on the doors and said, the landlord said the garage is mine. Built a grow tent out of pallets and particle board that I had acquired. Had a 6-inch centrifugal fan that was pulling off of the used 600 watt that I got off of what was there was this website that used to be in Northern California, and it was like SF Bud Trader or something like that. I don't remember the exact name, but it really pretty funny. Mike Maxwell, the gentleman that I got the used 600 watt from, also had clones in a different ad. And it was funny because I went to meet him and he's like, oh, I got to go meet this guy and sell him some clones here in a little while. And I was like, are they Sour Diesel and Black Widow? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's me as well. We actually became pretty good friends. But a lot of the stuff that I first started growing was, NorCal circulated shit. I had the Black Widow from Harborside. That was the original Mr. Nice Black Widow. That was my favorite weed that I've ever grown. It only tested at like 18% THC, but it was like 31% overall cannabinoids. And that other mix of stuff was the best thing I've ever had for back pain. That's the one strain that I'm like sad that I can't get it back. I grew the original Sour Diesel that I got from the Santa Cruz Unlimited guys, the Purple Urkel from Harborside. That was like the original Purple Urkel 45-day bumper crop that just threw out little fucking purple and orange golf balls. It was awesome. We grew in Fox Farm, Ocean Forest, Happy Frog, and Light Warrior. We did the 3 mix, and I was rocking Humboldt Nutrients back in the day. They kind of took a page out of Advanced's book and had a bottle for fucking everything, but it made you feel like you were really doing something if you had to mix 12 things.
Felt like you were making chili.
Yeah. Some of the I'll never forget what that sea cow smells like, dude. To this day, I still like.
And so that 600 watt was HPS that you were
Yes,
under?
sir.
Okay. And so then compare that to now, what are you working with like light wise, nutrient wise, clone or genetic wise, like where, what's your stack
So
now?
at Currently, I've got two tents, two 4x4 tents. One has got an Illumintex LED. One has got a Next Light LED in it. I typically like to run Synganics, so a mixture of dry organic, down to earth amendments, compost teas, and Dynagrow. Again, my mentality of base nutrients being cigarettes, I'm not going to spend a bunch of money on a liquid nutrient if I know that it's going to be just as good as something that is kind of old school. I've known Rich Neal for many, many years. Dynagrow is a badass old school company. And, I don't want to say that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's always been very successful for me, and so I utilize the Dynagrow in conjunction with a specialty fertilizer line that I get from American Clay Works in Denver. They source it from Spain. It's called Chematech. And the cool thing about Chematech is that it's all aminos, oligosaccharides, and like fulvic acid. And they've figured out certain aminograms to mimic hormonal effects in plants. So they have one that's for a stress response. They have one for fruit and flower development. They have one for root enhancement. And so, playing the aminos off that Synganic approach really does give me some really good results. In terms of what I've got going right now, I have a Tallimon that I got from Mothership that I'm looking forward to putting in because that's my favorite rosin. I've got some Super Boof that I got from a buddy down in Pueblo. It is the real deal, super purple, just cherry flavored shit. One of my favorites. And this year, getting ready to pop some new Ethos stuff that we got off this last multi-pass for my outdoor run.
Nice. What'd you pick?
I'm thinking that Endgame, and then what's the dude's name? It's the rank times something.
Oh, the Johnny Dang?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I've heard some good things about that.
I
Like to see
am
that outside.
super stoked on the Atomic Leisure line that's coming out. The OG crossed with Skittles. Some of the best weed I had smoked was that. Great taste, long lasting high that you'd catch me 2 hours later like, I haven't smoked in hours. What the hell is going on?
Is it going to be on the next multi-pass drop? Do you know?
I think it's their 420 drop, actually. Okay. I think it's the Atomic Leisure and the Atomic Fuego, I think, are what have been announced. There's probably more, but those are the ones I've gotten to try. I liked the Leisure better, but some are partial to the Fuego. Depends where your terp profile lies. I lean more candy and fruit and those kinds of things than some of those more traditional profiles. But
like I said, man, Tallyman's my favorite. Tastes like fucking banana Laffy Taffy.
Yeah, no, and I've got like Jordan pointed out when I got a few years into growing, she was like, you sort of trend towards all the same flavor, and I'd love to have something else. So, getting those wild cards in is fun. Okay, so
what do you think about toad venom, Ben?
What do I think about toad venom? I think that I tried to bring in a hype cut once. I've brought in a hype cuts a couple of times, and generally it's not worth it. And that's sort of just my overall thing. Like, I have heard great things about toad venom, as from consumers, from affluent connoisseurs who spend way too much money on weed, and I've been hearing great things for 2 years about it. But this whole switcheroo and what happens in the clone room, and I think it is the reality of growing. Any grower will tell you, keeping trays full of clones, eventually you're going to have a couple clones get swapped. Best case scenario, it's not something bad and you didn't get a dirty clone. Worst case scenario, you have no idea what you got. But I personally am not after, like, I brought in Blue Zushi at the urging of a friend. We had this whole thing where he bought the cut and he didn't want to be the one who have to quarantine it. So he was like, if I have it sent to you, can you quarantine it, take clones, and send me those, those clean clones, or give them to me? And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Everybody's hype on Blue Zushi. This sounds great. And I'm pretty certain that's where I got PM. And even if it's not, that's where my PM story originated, because then I did other things where I was complacent, where I decided, hey, this has been quarantined enough. I'm just going to flower the original clone I have and do some of these other things that broke protocol with what I would have done in other situations because I was excited and I wanted to get into production. I wanted to see it, and you know, I've smoked a fair amount of blue zushi flower. I know you can tell if it is or isn't similar at least, and that ended up costing me a whole run because I had to kill the whole tent and kill the whole everything that got that became, and that also happened to compound with the oh, my plant sitter doesn't need to do anything. I'll be back here in a few days. And things, of course, only amplified from there. But so long and the short version is I think that I would rather not chase hype cuts unless it's exactly and only what I wanted to smoke.
That's another thing that's really changed from, the early days to today is like back then you made hype. These days it seems like you take hype. There's all these folks that just want to follow, and it's like it's cool that there's somebody out there that has something that's awesome, but this coattail riding didn't used to exist, man. Like it would be like somebody dropped something that was amazing, and then 6 months later somebody had something different. But now it's like everybody wants to get on the fucking bandwagon and do the exact same stuff, and that's why prices are where they are, because there's this market demand, and then everybody grows the same stuff, and then that demand goes away, so prices fall. Like having that individuality is where home growers really kind of stand out, because they're not chasing that hype necessarily. They're not appealing to the masses that are buying off of just THC percentage. Like I
Well, and
always
I
say,
think, like going back to like what you said, like if there's a very specific thing, like if you could get the Black Widow clone and bring it in, from the old days where it was the perfect thing to cause back to cure or not to cure, but to minimize your back pain and to, help with that situation. In that case, I see a reason to bring something in hype or not, like it has a very specific use case. So no shade thrown at all. I just, like you said, the freedom of home growing is that you're not limited to what other people are growing. You
you
get to choose.
you are the consumer at that point. You're growing for you. So what varieties do you want to produce? It's not what Jim Bob is trying to buy for $30 an eighth. It's what does Ben want to smoke tonight?
Well, and it's like I go back to hazelnut cream, right? Like when I was a consumer, or not when I was a consumer, when I was buying hash only, and I was going to Dab Logic in Denver and getting their hazelnut cream, it was my favorite hash. Like, and I had said to multiple people, if I could only grow one thing and hash one thing, it would be this. And then I started growing and making hash, and quite literally, I've had the opportunity to buy the cut multiple times to get the cut, and it's never appealed to me in the same way. Now that I grow, like when I was only buying the things that I was consuming, it was like, oh man, that is the one. I would do that all the time. And now I'm like, I don't know. I might hunt something similar or want, like or not at all. But I did try to pop 2 packs of hazelnut cream, and I only had one seed out of both packs pop. So, it happens. Um, are you a wet or a dry trimmer?
Well, I mean, there are scenarios where I've had to do both, but if I can take my time and do it correctly, it's dry, of course.
Okay. And are you branch hanging or whole plant hanging, or how do you?
I'll typically take the tops and hang those on a separate, apparatus, just because they're going to take a little bit longer. And then anything smaller than, say, a quarter just gets hashed. I'm not
Okay.
wasting my time to trim a bowl.
Straight into the freezer.
Yep.
All right. Seeds or clones? Sort of circling back to our toad venom question.
So, seeds.
Okay.
Clones are awesome. They definitely allow us to find, or not find, but to grow a cultivar that we like. But to me, growing is finding new shit, pushing the envelope. And, clones are, like you said, I don't want to copy anybody else. Like I'll grow a variety a couple of times, and if it's something I really like, I'll keep it around. But the best weed comes from seeds, not clones. And if we want to continue to find the, latest and greatest, that's not going to come from cuts.
Yeah, it's funny. When I restarted, you and I talked about this, how I had made peace with not bringing any cuts back in, and then I started bringing cuts back in from people I'd given cuts to, but testing, and trying to be a little bit more diligent about quarantine and testing and some of these other things. And
Whether
none of
you're a home grower or a commercial grower, testing is invaluable. Work that into the budget, especially if you're going to be bringing in genetics. Even seeds, utilizing Farmer Freeman from the jump, doing sex testing and HLV testing is going to save you a ton of headaches in the long run because you're not waiting to see what happens. Moving with
Yeah.
that educated approach and, put that cost of testing against running 9 weeks of nutrients and lights and labor and everything else that goes into finding out you can't grow that variety.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, or, you get into flower and you realize it has something latent, that you've been momming this plant out and, keep taking clones or whatever it is. And now all that was for naught. Like, but to where I was going with this is the clones that I have sought out, actually, are so like atypical and antithetical for what the whole industry is. It's like, I wanted I wanted something very specific that nobody else had that a buddy of mine made from seed. Okay, cool. Well, that's, super unique. And I've washed it now enough times to know this is a 4% washer for clementine. Clementine does not wash. Clementine is garbage if you want orange chirps like clementine. So to find a 4%er, I was like, that's something I will bring into the grow. I want to smoke that enough that it's worth me going to quarantine, going through testing, going to the hassle to bring this in.
There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, man. There are some genetics, like you said, that are too good to pass up. But, like we talk about in the book, isolate that fucker.
Right.
Wait till it gets big enough to cut clones off of. Cut those clones, isolate them. And then if they look okay, then we're probably good to go. And the testing just allows us to make that confirmation that we're not just going off of visual cues. And, on a cellular level, this plant is ready to bang.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's and learning to deal with different plants, like I think that's the other thing that if you only pop seed and then you start growing clones, you will be experiencing a different level of vigor and different level of immunity and some of these other challenges that come with keeping a plant alive longer than it's designed to be alive. And not to say that you shouldn't, but it's just unique challenges that come with each tool. Flower or hash? I'm curious your response on this.
I used to be a flower guy. And kind of due to circumstance, I switched over to rosin last January, and I can count on my fingers and toes how many times I've smoked flower in the last year. It's not that I don't enjoy flower anymore. I just hash seems to be better for my current lifestyle. Taking a dab and then continuing about my day and not having to, sit down and smoke every hour is definitely a little bit more advantageous for productivity. And, I do love good flower. I love sitting down and smoking a joint, but for my daily driver, it's rosin and the Dr. Dabber, man.
Yeah, I love that. I just got a new dab device today, dab doohickey to play with. So fun.
What'd you get?
I got the link, the new Puffco link that they dropped. So I've got all the Puffco gadgets and
That's the Puffco bowl that'll actually fit on like a glass piece, right? Like a rig.
Yeah, so I'm going to a weed event, and when I typically go to a weed event, I have to bring my blowtorch and my terp soaking Tupperware and my drying towel and my terp slurper. Like it's just, it's excessive, right? And it's the preferred way to smoke. It's like making espresso at home. It's excessive, but there's a preferred way to do it. But from a convenience perspective, there have been a lot of companies over the years that have attempted this mobile e-nail thing. Like Grav had the fire button, which I had. It was the first e-nail that I used, like not first e-nail, but the first mobile e-nail that I used on a rig and broke a heady with. But this, I got to try it at a buddy's house, BC Glass. I was over at his studio, and he was like, it's not the same as a slurper, but it is a unique experience for someone who doesn't necessarily want to hit a Puffco or a Carter, or, they don't want to do that. They want to use the rig, but they don't want to go through the other process. So went and broke down. Well, and come to find out, it doesn't all come together. You have to go buy the atomizer to then go into the link, of course, because, it's like Apple. They get you on everything. But 2 dabs in, I'm like, this is worth every penny. I'm like, this is exactly what I was going for when I went out for the purchase. I wanted portable e-nail that I can use anywhere. I can bring my glass. I don't have to find a blazer and a can of butane everywhere I go.
I feel like I'm officially a hash nerd, dude, because this week I did get a little terp fridge.
Yeah, there you go. I love to hear that. Yeah, I have taken over half of the cheese drawer, I think, at this point, or the whatever the secondary drawer of the fridge is now dominated by hash and all of the things.
I'm sure Jordan doesn't mind.
She does not, especially as things have improved in quality. That certainly helps justify the space.
Hell yeah.
Melt or rosin? Are you on the rosin train only? Or are you smoking like high end bubble hash these days, or just rosin?
I'm a fan of cold cure, man.
Yeah,
The stability of it, the flavor, the potency, like I that's what I gravitate towards.
totally.
Not saying
Um,
I won't rip the other one, but if I'm buying it for me, that's what I'll go for.
yeah, no, I get that for sure. I look at melt as a treat. It's not a convenient thing. It's like I was discussing with someone else. It is truly, it's something, you're enjoying. You're taking a moment to do the thing that's not convenient.
It's like having a cigar.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, or it's like when you pour a nice glass to somebody and they do a shot and you're like, that was not a shot. That shouldn't have gone that fast. Um, okay, so what about either some genetic lines or some breeders? Do you have like a couple breeders or genetic lines you'd recommend to home growers looking to expand their palate?
So I'm a pretty big fan of Ethos Genetics. Colin definitely puts some stuff together that would work really well for home growers. He focuses on heavy yielders, and if you're only growing 6 plants, you want to get as much as you can. Swamp Boys, old school. Those guys have always put out fire. If you're looking for some unique terps, they're definitely some people to look at. Y Yeast, I think that's how it's pronounced. It used to be Compound. They do some really good work as well. Um, I mean, there's a ton of people out there that are Beth and Andy, Lovin, she crushes it. It's I don't want to leave anybody out, but Skunk Tech, there's too many to name. There's a ton of really good breeders out there that rather than give everybody shout outs, I'm going to go the opposite direction and say if your breeder that you are looking at is putting a drop out every 3 months, they're not testing that gear. Look for the breeders that are doing 1 or 2 drops a year. They're going to have consistency in their stuff. They're going to know what it is that they're selling you, and you're not going to be hunting for the breeder to have another round of seeds in 3 months. Because when we're going from seed, we want to have that stability. It sucks to grow a seed for 15 weeks and find out that you have a herm. And so I'm for supporting the people that do their homework.
Yeah, no, I'm fully on board with that as well. And do your research. Like when you're buying anything, like look into the breeder, look into are other people growing it? Like what are their experiences?
The other thing I'll say is like don't have FOMO when it comes to genetics. If it's $10,000, wait 6 months. It's going to be $100.
Yeah. No, I remember that. Oh God, what was that cut? It was in Colorado. The first time I heard about it was Endocana's cut. It was like 2017. They had some funky cut that sold for like 10K, and it was before I ever grew. I'm just blown. I'm like 10K for a cut. That's insane. But on the flip side, I know people who have spent that and they've blown out warehouses and greenhouses, and they've totally made their 10K back. So, different
And,
strokes for different folks.
even for a home grower, 10K sounds exorbitant, but amorate your costs of buying product over the next 2 years. You're probably going to drop 10 grand on weed. So if you can
Right.
invest that up front and then save that money in the long run, that's the biggest part, man, is like make sure that it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, myself included, when I was consuming, like I had a budget for weed, so to speak, that I tried to stick to, and retrospectively, if you added all that up, I could have bought a lot more grow equipment and then some if I was not just buying glass and hash. So, again, you
This
choose
is
where you
one
want to put your money.
this is one of the only hobbies that pays you back.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's very real, the savings and the joy you find in it, as most of us would attest to. Um it sounds like I know the answer to this question based on what you've already said, but do you have any cuts that you wish you could get back or that you've since chased?
The Black Widow.
Yeah, that was what I figured you were going to say.
That's the one that I wish I could have back. There's other stuff that I really enjoyed, but I already grew it. You
Right.
know, it's not something that I'm like, man, I wish I had it. That's the Black Widow is really the only one that I'm like, I can't believe I let that go.
Yeah. Well, and so to that point, do you know anyone from those days that's still growing it?
I have talked to a couple of people that were growing it. They are not anymore. I was able to track down a pack of seeds on the internet, but the guy wanted way too much money for them, considering they were 15 years old.
Yeah, and the fall off of, germination with proper storage and all. Yeah, I could see that. What's keeping you excited about cannabis and growing these days?
Innovation and just the potential for how do I medical research, I guess would be the best way to put it. You know, this plant can change people's lives in many many ways. It's made my life incredibly better. It helps cancer patients, it helps people with MS, it helps, kids with seizures. Now that we have kicked this can down the road this much further, I'm excited to see what universities and other entities are able to produce in terms of actual viable data on this plant, and allow us to maximize its usage. Not just for ingestibles, but there's hempcrete out there. There's all different kinds of uses for this plant, and as it becomes more and more mainstream, I feel like those uses are going to expand. And the cannabis market is very very small compared to what it could be if we look at it as a whole. Beyond just cannabinoids, like what else can it do for us?
Yeah. No, I think that's and there's so much waste, like the way that we can repurpose so much of the fiber and the biomass and all of it. Like how can we utilize, and really minimize that waste?
I can't believe someone hasn't developed a hemp plastic company yet for all the drams and containers and pop tops that the industry uses. If we could use a bioplastic for that made out of hemp, doesn't that make sense?
There were two of them in Denver back when, so the Hemp Connoisseur, when they were doing their magazine cup, they partnered with, God, I'm not gonna say the right name. I know it, so I'm not gonna try. But they partnered with a couple companies to do that. I don't know. My complaint was, like it's early iterations. It was not an airproof container because of how it was made, and so as a nose up connoisseur, I was like, my weed's drying out in that. Why would I put it in there? But yeah, I'm fully on board of ways that we can repurpose and make this craft more sustainable for sure. Um, what about your advice? What advice would you want to leave hobbyists that are listening, hobby growers, hash makers, or commercial growers and hash makers who are listening? Like what advice would you leave them with?
Be like a plant and try to grow a little bit every day.
Yeah.
Whether that's, personal growth, whether that's educational, whether it's, emotional, just try to be a little bit better every day, and everything else is going to follow suit.
Yeah, I think that I can get on board with that easily. For those growers who have stuck around and listened to the end of the episode and they've enjoyed your discussions and your view on the industry, where can they find you? Where can they support you? Where can they go to learn more about what you're up to?
So Zac the Grow Guy _ Biosafe on Instagram is my main social media. Post a lot of stuff on there in terms of visits, knowledge, just jokes, all kinds of stuff. But send me a DM. That's a really good way to get a hold of me. You can also call me 303-518-5105 or shoot me an email, zricciardi@biosafesystems.com. I've got a bunch of content up on YouTube. Definitely check out the Clean Growers book as well as the newsletter that Ben and I are doing. Every month, you guys are getting the latest and greatest in terms of just horticulture and, the advancements that have happened as of late. We did an article on aminos not too long ago that a couple growers told me was very informative, and, they were grateful for it. Other than that, podcasts, if you're around in Denver and you see me, holler and we'll smoke some hash. Other than that, hanging out with Ben.
There you go. Other than that, you got to get an invite to the super secret chili cook-off, which
Oh
I
yeah,
highly coveted to get an invite to. So yeah, we are regularly publishing great content with Clean Growers. I learn something new every time I talk to Zac. So thank you so much for sharing more knowledge with me and with the Hobby Grow. And hopefully it helps people grow a little bit and improve their crops and get that higher quality.
glad to do it, man. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, and just remember that tomorrow's always a new day, and every issue can be fixed.
That's it for now. New episodes drop weekly to inspire your hobby. Hit subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend. And as always, I'm your host, Ben Owens, and we'll see you next time.